Hello, good evening, and welcome to a TNC Live. Don't worry, the TNC counselling session starts on Monday for our usual TNC podcast. So the counselling session might not be tonight. We are here to strictly talk about the big breaking news today in the yellow and green world, and that is that David Wagner has been dismissed from his position as head coach at Norwich City Football Club. Absolutely massive news. Perhaps the writing was on the wall for a while after the dismal winter campaign. I really look forward to welcoming you all into the conversation tonight. Please do get your thoughts and feelings and opinions in the comment section, and we will read out as many as possible. It seems that my Nick's lost his connection already. So I'll announce him shortly. Here we go. Let's bring him into the stage. Really happy to say that we have a couple of really good Norwich City guests tonight. The first one is Nick. Hang on, Nick. I can't see you. Oh, you're back. Hello, Nick Master.
Yeah. This is when you know it's live, because I dropped out. It's just as you're about to
timing, mate. How are you, Nick? What's your first reaction to the big news today?
Yeah, it's not a surprise. I don't think in the end. The writing seemed to be on the wall for a while. Just from bits and pieces you hear. I think it was interesting. I was in the room at Birmingham last week that David didn't reference the sporting director Ben Napper when he was thanking people and thanking them for their support. So you did wonder, right? Okay, well, what's that about there? But look, ultimately, the sporting director will want his own man. It's just the nature of the beast. It's just what happens at every club. But Norwich aren't a unique case in this instance. It's just one that's probably been expected for 6 months.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. There's so many comments coming in. Thank you so much. We are going to read out as many of those as possible in just a moment. But let's just set the scene. Nick kindly, Nick did actually break the news onto the Norwich City scene today. And as he cuts out again, we'll quickly remove him. Let's talk you through what happened and the announcement. So, as you would have seen today, Norwich City posted this quite a bit after actually it was broken. As I say, I think it was Charlie Wyatt from the Sun, and then followed up by Nick Master into the Norwich City scene. As you can see there, Norwich City have parted company with head coach David Wagner. We would like to place on record our thanks to David for his hard work and contribution during his time at Norwich City, and then a link to the full statement. And the statement reads as follows: Norwich City have parted company with head coach David Wagner. Assistant head coach Christoph Bühler will also leave the club. Sporting director Ben Napper said, David has operated with class and dignity throughout his period as Norwich City head coach, but we now feel that the time is right for us to move in a different direction. We remain committed to progressing our football club in both the short and long term, working through a diligent and thorough strategy. The appointment of a new head coach is an important one. We will now work and continue our due diligence with the view to making an appointment in the near future. All at Norwich City would like to place on record our thanks to David and Christoph for their hard work and contributions to the club. We wish them well in their future careers. The club will now progress with its plans of appointing a new head coach. So there you go. There is the statement. Is Nick available? Nick? Nick? Oh dear, you can tell this is live tonight. Typical. Anyway, so that's the statement. Let's go into the comment section because there's loads of conversation. Just so much reaction. Fascinated to see what the Norwich City fans are saying about this. The comment section on here is actually breaking. There are so many comments in the software I'm using to produce this stream to you all tonight. So here we go. Let's go first. Nick was first in there. Nice chap. Correct decision. Glad we've acted swiftly. How very not Norwich City, OTBC. Hello, Nick.
No, going back again. There we are.
Hello, mate.
Apologies.
You're back. Let's throw one at you, sir. There's what about this one here? Had the sense it might come today after such a capitulation on the big moment. Nick, I want to go to you on this, matey, because couple of things I noticed last night. Small things, but perhaps telling. Firstly, the mentality of the players that went out onto the pitch was absolutely nowhere near it. Is this the leadership of a man that perhaps knew that it was game over if it went wrong, when it went wrong? We know Leeds at Ellen Road is a formidable force this season. I also found it really disappointing that he was actually smiling after the final whistle with Daniel Farke as well, which I thought was very bizarre. But essentially, what I'm trying to say here, Nick, is that really they had to move him on after that performance, didn't they?
Yeah, look, it seems that it was probably untenable after that. Ultimately, Norwich not getting promoted is a failure. And if you look at how they've done against the top 6 this season, including the playoff games, they've won 2 out of the in 12 games out of the rest of the top 6, and ultimately that appears not to be good enough, really. They've done well enough against the other sides in the Championship, and they've got the players to do so. But when you just look at the bare stats against the better sides in the Championship, they're failing. They've fallen short, and we just have to look at the table. You just have to look at the results to see that.
Yes, I am with you. So many comments about the next manager and what comes next, and we will get into that, I'm sure. Elliot Pearson says he's shocked. I'm quite surprised by that, but great to hear. We do want to hear from anyone's opinion. Some people are perhaps sad at the situation that David Wagner's gone. I've seen a few people say that it's the wrong decision, which is interesting. Nick, I want to ask you about I guess, how this all happened. I'd be really keen to learn, perhaps when you found out about this going on, and how would this have worked maybe for David? Because obviously, you have lots of relationships in the inner circles of football. So I'd be really keen to understand from you how this might have perhaps gone today for David Wagner.
Yeah, I can. I was travelling back from London this morning, so I wasn't in any rooms with anybody while this was going on, unfortunately. But I mean, I heard about it this morning. Obviously, Charlie at the Sun. I was writing my piece just as Charlie put it out there. So unfortunately, from a journalistic point of view, that sometimes happens. But there's a process to go through. Whether he was told last night or this morning, again, that's not something I'm aware of. But he would have said I'm sure quite a few goodbyes today anyway. And it's just inevitable. It's always sad when somebody loses their job, of course. But it just appeared that from a good number of months ago that this day was going to come sooner rather than later, and ultimately not being able to get promoted has just hastened things.
Absolutely. I think we need to sort of really add into this, Nick, that David Wagner was a good bloke, and there's absolutely no doubt that he worked extremely hard to try and restart this Norwich City engine after the dismal time, really, that we all felt with Dean Smith in charge. Of course, a good contact and connection with yourself, Nick. Let's read this, though, from Jeffrey Smith, because I think it sets the scene well. Relieved Wagner is gone, but he deserves respect. Came across as a great bloke, got playoffs under some tricky circumstances, was just never a good fit. The football was dire. Nick, what would your response be to that? Because I also at the BBC.
Say hello to my daughter, who's not very happy.
I also do agree with Jeffrey that David deserves a lot of respect, really, because he came in at the club at a really tricky time. I'm sure you won't argue against me that, of course, all of the turbulence around Stuart's departure, etc. There was a lot going on, being relegated from the Premier League, having Sargent out injured. There's a lot of context here, right? I think it's very easy to simply slag off David Wagner as, the problem. But actually, I personally don't believe he has been the only problem. Would you agree with that? Do you think David Wagner deserves more respect, Nick?
Everybody does, whether it in just life, people do, and unfortunately, sometimes in football. And Brendan Rodgers made a good point a couple of years ago that he felt that there was a sort of a society problem within the game, because now it feels people can do and say what they want within the confines of a stadium. They feel it's sort of free reign. So yeah, look, everybody deserves respect. I think it's been a really difficult position for David to be in. There is clearly going to be a lot of transition, clearly going to be a lot of change. We've started to see that with Steve Weaver moving on a few weeks ago, and I'm sure there'll be more changes to come, both in and out, playing personnel and club personnel, as well as Ben gets the grips and really starts to make his mark, because he needed time as well. And just where the club is right now, it appears that they're at another tipping point, and
Yes.
that it's just a really difficult situation to manage, unfortunately, and that goes for not just David, but Ben and other people at the club as well. So you can understand both sides of the argument. David might have felt that he might have wanted more time or deserved more time, but you can understand why ultimately the sporting director wants his own man in.
Yeah, I agree with that, Nick. Absolutely. I think it's been pretty obvious the writing's on the wall. I do understand that the relationship between Mr. Napper and David Wagner became somewhat fractious, particularly towards the end of his time here at the football club. It was very clear, even just from some of the comments from both of them publicly via the press, that their vision and the way they see football are quite far apart, actually. So really, Nick, do you think that we should have done this sooner? Do you think that Ben Napper made the right call by keeping David Wagner at the helm? I'm quite interested in your comment earlier. You said it was a failure that Norwich City didn't get promoted this season. We had Chris Gorham on the podcast 3 weeks ago, and we said, really, at the start of the season, would we have taken playoffs? I think the answer that most Norwich City fans, let us know in the comment section, would say yes, we'd take playoffs, considering who's come down from upstairs in the Premier League. And after that torrid winter form, Napper, sticks with David Wagner, and that epic sort of home form happened. So I'm quite interested to get your take on that, Nick, really. Should we have got rid of David Wagner sooner, or actually did Ben Napper make the right call, seeing how this played out this season?
Yeah, it's hypothetical. I guess you could argue that if he makes a change in November, December, or when he came in, things could have gone worse. Any new man, we don't know. Nobody's got a crystal ball to look forward or backwards at all. So ultimately, it's what's happened, and Norwich are facing another season in the Championship, and financially, it's going to be really difficult for them. You look at what the club will have to work with, what they might have to do in terms of selling players. There'll probably be players like Sarah who will look at it and go, well, I've done my 2 years apprenticeship in the Championship. Maybe it's time for me to move on. And that Jonathan Rowe's the golden goose in terms of plugging any larger financial holes as well. And he's done really well. Obviously, second half of the season, it's been difficult because of injury. So if they'd made a change sooner, would it have made any difference? You just don't know. And with that, you can argue, okay, yeah, look, a new man would have had time to bed in, and then they could really go and push things through in the summer. But Ben has an awful lot to do. And I don't think anybody can underestimate or should underestimate the size of the job that he's actually got on. There is an awful lot to do. It's similar to 2017 when you look at where the club is, and what they need to rebuild. So, what was it? Keeping the status quo might have been the most sensible thing to do, even though ultimately they've not managed to get promoted.
I think the football club have done so well to create this fantastic training facility, right, and the right environment. But I still just think, Nick, and linked to your comment there of would any manager really have turned it around in the circumstances? I'm not quite sure. Again, Chris Gorham referenced this in our podcast together, and he said if the manager was, say, Carlos Cuesta, and he got us into the playoffs after that winter campaign, I think, certainly talking Norwich City would be flying flags and build statues and all of that. And so, I think it's an interesting one. And mentioning that man, and thank you so much, George, for the super chats. Very kind of you. George says, be interesting on how quick Norwich City can get this sorted. Hopefully Carlos is the man. Young and good experience under Arteta. Come on, you yellows. Nick, I was going to do this later on in the conversation, but I think we'll just dance all over the place tonight because there are just so many comments to get through. What's your thoughts and feelings on Carlos Cuesta, on the future Norwich manager, on how and perhaps when it could happen? I would love to know your feelings on that.
Yeah, look, there's clearly been interest in Cuesta, as myself and Ed Aarons in the Guardian wrote. I think it was February time. I wouldn't necessarily hang my hat completely on that happening. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out. Clearly, there is a plan, because you don't sack a manager a day after the playoffs to then fiddle around and work out what to do. And Ben's had enough time to work out what he wants to do. So I think we all know how things work in football. I would be very, very surprised if there wasn't a succession plan and things weren't moving forward quite quickly. So will it be Carlos Cuesta? I'm not 100% convinced, but we'll have to see on that one. But as I said, it's their fault to see. He's got David Wagner's gone. It's not necessarily a bold call, but it's one that shows that Ben has a plan.
Yes, the timing of it particularly.
It's not a knee-jerk reaction.
Yes,
I think that from outside Norfolk, it might look like, well, Norwich haven't gone up; they've lost 4-0, and he's been sacked less than 24 hours later. I think that that's probably a wrong call, but there is a plan. Believe things are progressing with said plan. But in terms of exactly who's going to come in, I wouldn't want to nail the colours to any kind of mast just yet. So we'll have to see.
Yes, it is a little bit soon for names, isn't it? There's various debate.
Yeah, I mean, Carlos Cuesta's a future manager who has attracted a lot of interest in the Championship. He's on lists for Championship clubs. He is on radars. He's there. So was it any surprise that Norwich had an interest in him? No, not particularly. Will ultimately that come to fruition? Again, sort of things develop through the day, and I'm not 100% sure on that at the minute, but we'll see. Things can change quite quickly.
Nick, and speaking quickly, maybe I'm being a bit of too much of a supporter on this, but I'm like, right, let's get on with this now, because for me, I'm quite concerned about the player coming and going. Yes, I think we need root and branch change. We need a big shift in the squad dynamic, and certainly the age side of things, particularly. But surely we need a new head coach in like tomorrow, because you're going to try. We now need to persuade Gabby Sarah, Josh Sargent, Angus Gunn, Borja Sainz to stay at this football club. And maybe I'm being a bit emotional about it, but I do feel with these sorts of big players that we've got, albeit they of course didn't turn up yesterday. Surely the new manager needs to come within the next 2-3 weeks. Bearing in mind that we've got now 2 months until the new season starts, and they need to align with Napa's vision and his plan. They need to sign players that he wants. He needs to get rid of some players that he's not happy with, and perhaps needs to sort out his coaching staff behind the scenes as well. and he needs to persuade new players to stay. So I don't know. Am I being a bit too much of a fan on that, Nick? Can this wait longer than 2 weeks for us to sign a new head coach?
No, I'd be very, very surprised if that was the case. I mean, as I said, so if you sack a manager a day after the playoffs, there is a plan. Ben, when he come in November, so he's had 6-7 months now to really get to grips with the club and understand what it needs to be done. And while I'm not going to say that a manager is going to be appointed in the next hour or so, I cannot see it dragging on. I think it's important to get the right person. It doesn't matter. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily matter how long it takes, as long as it's the right person. Because, just make sure that take that extra day or two or speak to everybody, do due diligence, which Ben has had 6 or 7 months to do already.
Yes.
So
yeah.
If there is somebody there, I believe that that Ben has somebody in mind, it while I can't sit here and say, oh, it's going to take X, Y, and Z time. I'd be very, very surprised to see it drag out, unless there are unforeseen complications, of course.
But yeah, no, I'm with you, Nick. I think now is the time, though, that of course we're, all Norwich City supporters are calling on public comment, right? We need to know what is the plan, where are we going, and I'm very, very hopeful that that will be the case in the not so distant future from Ben Napper. It's important because it's all very well and good the people in the the so-called inner circles understanding there's this exciting plan, and even myself I've had a couple of conversations with the Atenasios about just how much they rate Ben Napper and how excited they are about his plan and about his strategy and things like that. And of course they can't tell me what it is, and rightly so. And so it's so important that the Norwich fans start to get a bit of insight. And Nick, just want to touch on this actually. Important to note that we do expect the large majority of players out of contract to not have their contracts renewed, including Sam McCallum, which I shared on social media just a short while ago. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think perhaps that was another reason why David Wagner couldn't necessarily get that group of players up for it yesterday? If there was that many players, like surely those players were told they weren't having their contracts renewed before the game yesterday, or were they told afterwards, like David Wagner was told afterwards he's lost his job as well? What's your thoughts on that?
It's the nature of the beast of football. Every club is going to have players out of contract, playing for their futures or playing for the next move. So it's just in terms of sort of the professionalism of it. You need to. They need to know where they're going to go. They need to know where they're going to be. So you understand there's some uncertainty to it, but it's a job. Ultimately, it is your job. You have to be professional about these things, and you have to get the job done. For instance, Sam McCallum, believe there's interest from Stoke in him. Ender Stevens has just signed a new deal, but believe they are looking for another player in that position. So it's ultimately in any job you just have to be professional and continue to do your job, continue to do the work, continue to get the job done, because you are being paid, and quite well paid for footballers. So if they took their eye off the ball, I can understand, but ultimately there is always a level of professionalism that you have to maintain.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And actually, speaking of professionalism, that's something that in my opinion people can't criticize David Wagner of. I didn't particularly like the smile post-match after the loss to Leeds yesterday. I'm smiling through, like I'm crying. What's that meme where the crying face is over the top of me? I feel like that at the moment. But actually, considering what David Wagner has had to go through this season, on and off the pitch with performances, with some personal challenges as well, I think he does afford that context, and I think it's important that Norwich fans consider that when making their thoughts and feelings and opinions. Nick, what's been the perhaps the highlight and the low light of David Wagner's tenure for you? Would you? I mean, for me, the only thing I can really think of straight off the bat is, of course, that that Ipswich win, which was absolutely glorious. But I'd be interested to get your thoughts and feelings on that.
Yeah, look, extending the run over Ipswich, I guess, is always going to be the one that Norwich fans will look at. You have to look at the nadir of Blackburn in November, which ultimately that was sort of the stopping point, if you will, and they started to pick up and managed to get themselves back up the table. But that team shouldn't have slipped to 17th in the championship.
Yeah,
in terms of budgets, in terms of players at their disposal, they should not have got into that position. I've always maintained they have the players to beat the majority of teams in the division, because I think the division, certainly speaking to other sporting directors and people within the championship sphere, the quality has dropped. Whether that's Brexit, teams that are losing 70% of the players they might have ordinarily been able to bring in to make a difference and help the quality of the league, financial fair play, profit sustainability, whatever you want to call it, and a COVID financial hangover, which is just still sort of having ripple effects within every league as well. So the league has dropped off in quality, I feel, but Norwich should never have got into that position in 17th, and you then have to give David Wagner credit for turning it around, for getting them to sixth, because at that point I don't think anybody would have seen them even making the playoffs.
Nick, finally, really appreciated your time coming on tonight. Really would like to hear, I guess, your list of priorities really for Ben Napper now that David Wagner has been somewhat shown the door. I'd love to see kind of what your top 3 things are for this summer.
Well, okay. New manager.
There's a long list.
There is quite a long list. I think that the way that Ben wants to play, or that he wants his teams to play, as he's outlined previously, I don't think Norwich within the squad have got the players to do that. So, you're never going to be able to manage to turn all of that around in one window. So that's going to be really, really difficult. You cannot ship in. I mean, Stoke did it last year. They can't ship in sort of 17 and get 17 in. There's too much change. That will rock the boat too much. And also, they've got players on longer contracts who are on a decent salary, who they might struggle to get rid of as well, if they so wish to move them on. And it's an aging squad, so I think bringing in the players that will fit the style and fit what Ben wants to do, trying to lower the age of that squad as well. I think that's already something that he's alluded to quite early on anyway. And just, I think, a bit of harmony. It'd be nice to have a little bit of harmony. I think there's seems to have been quite a large disconnect for quite a while between club and fans, and you're only going to be able to get that back by getting people to invest in what you want to do.
Yes,
people have to understand. There has to be a buy-in. You have to talk to them. Ben's not done an awful lot of media, but it is incredibly important to be able to speak to the fans. Not all the time, we get it. Not every sporting director does that. Again, Norwich, not a unique situation there, but you need to be able to talk to the fans. And I think after the last few years of the difficult relationship between the club and the fans, that's really important. I think they do have to repair that somewhat as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the most important thing, and I believe that's what a new head coach will certainly start to bring. Nick, thank you so much for coming on tonight, mate. I really appreciate it.
No worries, buddy.
Thank you very much. That is Nick Masheter, of course, of the BBC, dropping all sorts of exclusives left, right, and centre. I love Nick. Always enjoy chewing the fat with him. And now I'm really excited to bring aboard the Pinkens, Connor Southwell.
Good evening. How are you, my friend?
I don't know about you, Connor, but my phone has been melting all day. Like the social notifications, all of the rumours of next Norwich managers and what people think about David Wagner. What's it been like inside the Pink and Towers?
Yeah, quite similar, really. Similar. Obviously, that then you throw in the added complication of having to travel back from Leeds, and all of that stuff. And it's been pretty hectic as a day and as a 24 hours, to be honest. Obviously, as Nick outlined, similar sort of timeline in terms of when we heard the news, and then you're sort of chasing your tail for the rest of the day. So yeah, it's been a busy one. It's been frantic, and I suspect the next few days, weeks will be exactly the same.
For those of you that have just joined us, just in case you have been living under a rock, it has been officially announced today by the football club that we have parted company with David Wagner. I'm not going to read that again, but there's also a statement on there which is important for people to go and read. Connor, what did you pick out of that official statement from Norwich City? I'm very interested to get your thoughts and feelings on that.
Yeah, one word really in the quotes from Ben Napper, which is sort of continue. When he talks about continuing the process for the next head coach, I think that was a real indication that this is clearly and that's everyone sort of in the Norwich City bubble I think knows this, but externally there's been a little bit of and naturally because of the result, I think there's maybe a feeling that you've lost 4-0 in the playoff and you sack a manager. It's not quite the way that it's panned out. I think this is been in the offing for a significant period of time, and those quotes confirm that. So that was what I found most interesting, because I think it probably confirms what we've suspected, and I know you've spoken about on your podcast, and we have on ours, and all, various channels, and it has felt probably an inevitability really that we were going to reach this stage, and maybe even irrespective of outcome this season as well. If Norwich City would have even ended up in the Premier League, I think there was a possibility, but maybe not a finality that we would have ended up here. So for me, I think it's a good sign, because, and I think a little bit unfairly, Ben Napper's got this perception that he's not really been doing anything, that he's not really been making decisions behind the scene. I think that's really unfair. I don't think it's necessarily true, and I think we've seen that backed up with what's happened today. So I think that was what struck it for me, and it's going to be a really interesting few weeks now, because I think this could all move pretty quickly.
Connor, when was the writing on the wall for you with David Wagner? Truthfully, like, be honest here, because it's been a fascinating season, isn't it? I think it was Chris Gorham dropped the word scenic in terms of the route that it took for us to get to the playoffs. I know that we've both robbed that one in our podcast too. Ultimately, David Wagner did get us into the playoffs. I think we probably would have taken out the start of the season, considering the teams that went down. And we've actually had a super chat here from Ezek, actually, who says, why are people so down? Finishing sixth was a good result considering the amount of injury problems the team had this season. We were 17th at one point. So sorry, I've just said a load of stuff there, Connor. It's been a long day. When was the writing on the wall for you with David Wagner? Do you think people are being too harsh because of where we've ended up? And thanks for the super chat, Ezek.
So in terms of writing on the wall, I've probably been there a couple of times this season, to be honest. I think most recently was probably, well, two moments that I'd pick out really. It was in the aftermath of the Sheffield Wednesday draw. When was that? April, maybe slightly earlier, when they had obviously thrown a 2-goal lead away. We don't need to go over the mechanics of that game again, but post-game, I spoke to David Wagner, and he was pretty critical about the situation that the squad had been allowed to get in terms of its thinness, and was quite critical maybe of some of their January business. So when that starts happening and you get a head coach almost firing shots upwards, it's never a great sign. And then probably most recently after Birmingham, after Norwich City secured that place in the playoffs, he then basically went out of his way to praise Stuart Webber. So he's sort of gone from firing upwards to then praising his former boss. So those things are just signs, and you read between those lines. And he had opportunity to obviously credit Ben Napper as well. He didn't do that. So I think they're probably the most recent examples. I felt after Sunderland away earlier on in the season, in that really bad run, 7 defeats in 9, everyone knows that. I thought he was gone then. He looked, I was in the room when he was doing his post-match press conference, and he looks pretty broken. Then, and obviously after Blackburn as well. So it's probably been at that point 3 or 4 times this season. And in terms of the playoffs, I think it's probably about par in terms of where Norwich City were. If you want to sort of play it in that way. I think the budget they had, the talent that they had in their starting 11, I think we could all see that, and ultimately it's why they've ended up in the top 6. The issue is I don't think they had the quality in deeper areas. They had a really good 11, and beyond that, not much else. I mean, even last night, you look at the bench of options they had, and they had 3 attacking options on the bench: Science, Fashnacht, and Van Hooijdonk. So has he done well to get the squad where it has got to? Absolutely. And I think even though, people talk about the individualism that maybe has fueled this Norwich team at points, well, actually, you need a coach to create a structure that allows those individuals to be creative. So, has he done a good job? I think that's up for debate. Has he achieved par? I would say he has.
Well, let's talk about that, Connor. You the guys of the Pink 'Un, you dropped this on social media earlier today. Quite an interesting record. I'll call it interesting. This is the thing, Connor. It's been so yin and yang, isn't it? There's been such a big contrast in form throughout the season. 1 minute I've got Jack Reeve on the TNC podcast saying that we're actually in the running to be relegated. Next thing you know, we're saying we could win at Wembley. And if you look at the record there, 31 wins, 17 draws, 27 defeats. Of course, that's over a couple of seasons, and I think what's that, 3 windows as well. So, yeah, what's your reflections on David's record, and why was it so patchy, Connor?
Well, I think that's probably a question that's existed throughout his managerial career, to be honest. And even the end of this season, I know they've had a really good run, but you look at how they ended the season. It's what they've ended it with 1 win in 7, I think, 1 win in 6. So even that is a little bit of a streak within itself. You could contrast the home and away record. I think it's a really difficult one to put your finger on, to be honest, because you look at what they achieved at Carrow Road after that Blackburn defeat to 15 games unbeaten and made Carrow Road a real fortress. And then you go away from home and you look a complete shadow of that. It's really difficult to explain why that is the case. I think for me, all of it boils down to, and Nick spoke about it a little bit in your first part, but just the fit of it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like Norwich, in terms of the fan base and what they want to see from the type of football they want to see played, to him as a head coach and what he wanted to deliver, and maybe even his mindset at points, in terms of he was always quite keen for Norwich to be the underdog, and I'm not necessarily sure that was always the role that Norwich City fans see for themselves, particularly in the Championship. So yeah, it is a patchy record, I think. And to be fair to David, he had a really, really tough job that he inherited. It was a football club that was broken in terms of the connection between its fan base and some people at the club, and he fought really hard to try and get the fan base on side, to try and create a unity. And actually, in the latter stage of this season, he probably did achieve that to an extent. Even, I feel it was a little bit of a truce, because everyone was trying to push for an objective, a little bit like, you've got a divorcing mum and dad, and everyone was thinking of the child in the middle. It's kind of what it felt like a little bit to me. Yeah. But just never really quite able to find a consistency. And I think probably in the final analysis, that's probably what has cost him, I think, in terms of getting Norwich City out of the Championship and improving it. Because as much as we maybe talk about the run to 6th and all of those various things, he was also the coach that got Norwich into 17th. He was also the coach that saw them finish 13th towards the end of last season and failed to score in any 5 of their last home games. So yeah, really, really strange record that he's got. And it's going to be interesting, I think, and we probably won't know in terms of the next few months, maybe even years, what that legacy will be. But yeah, I think it's the word I keep coming back to describe his tenure is just really bizarre, really, and that I'm finding it hard to find anything like that, because there was some good moments, some good runs, some good wins, some excellent goals, and yet it felt for a lot of it really hard to kind of extract enjoyment out of that. And even now, it's quite hard to pinpoint why that's the case.
Yes, no, I am with you, Connor. We are probably going to go back to David Wagner conversation. There's so many comments flying in the comment section. Thank you so much for that. I really, really appreciate it. We are going to raise those and get your questions in for Connor, and we'll respond to as many as possible. And let's talk about the future, Connor, a little bit, please, because I think that's what a lot of Norwich City fans want to do. They very much want to put David Wagner's tenure behind them. And of course, now it's all about the new head coach hunt, of course, led by Mr. Napper. What are your initial thoughts on this, Connor? Of course, lots of talk about Carlos Cuesta. There's a ton of names being thrown around on social media already today. What's your instant reaction to all of that stuff?
Yeah, it's always interesting, isn't it? At this stage, this is what I call the frenzied stage of the managerial cycle, which I think we go through, where names just sort of get thrown up again, like wet bits of paper. Just say, hey, have another one, which is always good fun, I think. And people look at kind of bookmakers' odds and how much these things mean. I don't know. I think it's really interesting for me because I think there is actually not that I'm trying to analyze bookmakers' odds, because you can't do that particularly at this stage, but it is interesting the names that are at the top of that list at this moment in time. And that's not to say that any of these people will end up as Norwich City's next head coach, but I think the profile is interesting. Carlos Cuesta, who you mentioned, Will Still, even Liam Rosenior, they're young coaches. They're in that category of being viewed as quite progressive. I think it's probably an open secret, really, that Ben Napper wants a younger appointment as Norwich City's next head coach. You think about Dean Smith and David Wagner, yes, very different personalities, very different outlooks on life and on football. But in terms of their coaching trajectory, where they were at different points, I think that they were quite similar, really, in terms of profile of candidate. You look at some of the managers who have done really well in the Championship this season: Enzo Maresca, Kieran McKenna, dare I say his name, even Russell Martin, Daniel Farke, less so, but he's still in sort of that frame. That they've been younger coaches and often coaches who are sort of in the early stages of their careers. So that feels like the direction of travel we will move in. And two of those names, Cuesta's 28 and Will Still's 31. So that gives you an indication, I think, is maybe to the type of profile that is being expected.
But what do you want, Connor?
I want.
Get your cards on the table. Give us a couple of names. Come on. Who do you want? Or maybe, Connor, who's your dream head coach and who's your realistic head coach? Come on.
I'm a big admirer of Danny Röhl at Sheffield Wednesday. I think what he's done this year is fantastic. But I will caveat that and say I think I read somewhere that he's got a £10 million compensation fee, which is bonkers. So that's a shame. But I think he's a manager on the up. So someone like, but for me, I think at this stage, I'm probably more inclined to talk about profile rather than names, if that makes sense. I think I'm probably keener, for Norwich to go down a younger route, possibly someone who's maybe not even managed before. I think you look at the trends that I've spoken about. These have been career coaches, people who are young and people who maybe can inject their ideas into Norwich City, not maybe a recycling ideas or taking ideas from former projects. I think that would be good. And someone with energy and someone who has a real burning desire and passion, ambition to drive this forward now, because that's what it needs, because it's going to be difficult. There's going to be some very hard choices along the way in terms of players being sold. And I think what Norwich, and I can't, maybe people in the comments will tell me if I'm wrong, but the sense that I get is that Norwich fans are kind of ready for a bit of a project again. They're ready for a bit of an adventure again. They're ready for, someone to believe in, trust, and all of those elements, and maybe a bit more long term. That's kind of the way I think I see this panning out. Feels like it now needs a 2-3 year project, and that feels to me probably suited for someone quite young.
Yeah, you've well dodged that, Connor, but I'll let you off because I like you. Connor, how does the player churn affect when the manager comes in, and also when the manager comes in, who the manager is? Because I'm kind of sorry, I'm not making sense. I'm really running on empty now, everyone. It's been a long day. Because the conundrum I've got in my head, Connor, is I'm thinking we need a new head coach soon, because we need to persuade the likes of Gabby Sarah and Sargent and Gunny and Signs to stay. And yet, if we sign the wrong manager, then they're not going to stay anyway. Or maybe they're going to go regardless. And therefore, if they're going to go regardless, then the head coach that we get will either say yes or no based upon who we can keep as well, right? Because surely a manager isn't going to just come in from complete, like, oh, by the way, welcome to Norwich City. We're selling all of our best players. Good luck. That's surely going to impact the quality of gaffer we can get, Connor. Or am I talking rubbish?
No, I don't think you are. And I think there's probably an element of that. I think this also hinges, though, on strength of relationship between sporting director and head coach. That needs to be very strong. And there needs to be a real trust there, which is why I think we've probably seen what has happened today happen ultimately, because that wasn't quite as strong as perhaps it needs to be moving forward. And that being the case, that a head coach signs maybe irrespective of what the squad is going to look like, because let's be honest, Norwich probably are going to have to sell at least one of those cohort of players that you mentioned. And as a head coach, you have to sign up for that. And that means that you have to have complete trust in the decisions that Ben Napper is taking, both from a recruitment perspective inwards, but also from an outwards perspective. And that's why, the word alignment's been used a lot. That is why that is so important. And I think any head coach, and this is, I know all of the things you've outlined there and all of the maybe the issues that have been spoken about over the last 45 minutes, but this is still such an attractive job, and there'll be loads of people and really well established, excellent coaches who will want the job, because it's a club traditionally that gives coaches time, and it is one that gives them quite a lot of freedom as well. So for me, what you said there comes down to that relationship between Ben Napper and whoever that head coach will be. If that is really strong, then I think some of those things maybe are a little bit less important. Obviously, you want to keep your best players, but the head coach will be arriving likely having signed a contract, knowing that the reality is that cohort of players that will have a lot of suitors probably won't be intact come the start of the season, I suspect.
Yes, absolutely. And this is the other thing about when we went with David Wagner, obviously prioritizing experienced players, and for me, yes, he did give some opportunity to the youth to a degree, but in my opinion, definitely not enough. So the new head coach is going to come into the building with a bunch of experienced players on long contracts on big money, or big-ish for this club and this league. They're not going to surely just be able to just change that, because people are going to have to come in for those experienced players. So even when we do bring in a new manager, Connor, this could be again another 2 or 3 window task, or maybe I'm being a bit dramatic about it. Am I overthinking this? Am I short on Lakens?
No, I don't think so. I think that's a very, very fair and valid point. And you think back to 2017 and some of the names that Norwich had on the books at that point. Ruddy, Martin, Ryan Bennett was still here. And there's nothing against those pros that I've mentioned, but you had kind of an aging core of the squad that were on quite a significant portion of money, and it took 3 or 4 windows to fully shed that. So that's going to be the case here again. You've got Ashley Barnes has got another year on his deal. Shane Duffy has got another 2 years on his deal. There are others that we could throw into that mix. So it is going to be difficult, I think. Grant Hanley, another one you could mention, and then it's up to individual people to debate their worth and their value. And you're right, it's difficult when you have players at that age to move them on because of the way that football shifts. I think Norwich are probably naturally helped by the fact that they're going to be releasing quite a few players, I suspect, over the coming days, and that is going to free up cash first and foremost. But it is going to help in terms of that average age of the squad, which I think will be significantly reduced next year. I think Norwich will have a much younger team to it, and then it's about what sort of value you can extract out of those experienced players, because, for as much as there's been talk about the experienced core that Norwich have built this year, and maybe the negative side of that, it can also work with young guys. If you get too many young guys in the same squad, look at Sunderland, who are a really good example. You need a balance. So there's still a role to play for some of these players, providing they're utilised in the right way. And then it's obviously up to a head coach to try and balance that. But yeah, it is problematic when you've got contracts like that and you've got players on extended deals, because there's who are on good money as well, by the way, because and quite rightly, you understand this from a human level. They've got to look after themselves and their families. It wasn't their fault. They were offered what they were offered.
Of course.
And they're entitled to sit on that. So if they wish, a lot of players don't. A lot of players want to go and play. So I think you are right, and there is clearly an issue there. I think that may be one that, as you say, probably everyone has to show a little bit patience over the next 2 or 3 years about addressing, because, as you said, finding suitors for those players is going to be very, very difficult, both because of their contractual lengths and getting them finding moves that are going to match what they're on at the moment, both from a money perspective and a security perspective, is going to be near on impossible, I think.
It's such a huge task this summer, isn't it, Connor? I said to Nick before we finished with him, what were his sort of 3 perhaps main priorities, and I think we ended up citing actually just bringing people together. I think he used the word harmony was the most important thing, which is quite fluffy, but I think there's a whole lot of truth to be said in that. How can Ben Napper create that harmony, and do all of the other things that need to be done? And what are those sort of top 3 things in your opinion? Because I don't think I'm being dramatic by saying there's a massive list in terms of Ben Napper's in tray. I think it's probably piling over his desk now with various things that he needs to sort on and off the pitch. So what are your thoughts on that, mate?
Yeah, agreed. I think I would say that hopefully, and this is where, I think based on today's decision, you would hope that is the case. He's had a period of time now to really assess what he wants to do and how he wants to do it and to navigate that course. And, a lot of these things aren't unforeseen. They're not things that have popped up. These are things that and problems that have existed for a period of time. So he has, and we know, I think we're building up now a pretty good image of what he's like as a character. He's not knee jerk. He's not someone that is reactive to events. There is a proactivity there. He is calculated. He does look at a lot of data. So there will be a lot of strategic planning in terms of how he wants to build teams. And it also takes good comms, I think. And this is maybe something that I would bring to the table in terms of maybe senior figures at the club more broadly. You think about when Stuart Webber came in 2017, some of those messages weren't necessarily what people wanted to hear. They weren't easy messages to convey, but actually that honesty and that clarity that for everybody can help bring people together. And that's what it needs now. It needs a little bit of healing because it's felt for too long like you've got people pulling and pushing in different directions and finger pointing at each other at various points. And that's just not sustainable. And if you want to win together on the pitch, you have to win together off the pitch. And that means culturally setting an example and building that. So for me is the major thing that I hope from this summer is that not only we see some action in terms of the decision making and some sort of joined up thinking in terms of that. It would be nice to hear, for the fans to hear what the plan is, where the direction of travel is, why they're playing, why they're taking decisions. Why do you want to play football like that? Why do you want to bring young players in like that? These are the sort of things that would be good to hear, because I think that then helps make people understand. And if you understand, as they did so well in that first period under Daniel Farke and Stuart Webber, you bring people with you on that journey. And that's what they need to do now. They need to bring people with them on a journey, because if it is, as we mapped out, a younger coach, and they're going to have to be a little bit patient about churning the squad, then you have to do that. But yeah, Ben Napper's had a period of time now where hopefully he's been able to really formulate a plan. And I think what today shows is that he's not mucking around. He's gonna crack on with it. And that is, I think, what this football club needs, because it's felt like there's just been a sticking plaster on the whole thing, and that needs to be torn off, and the issues underneath need to be addressed.
It almost feels like, Connor, by the way, here on so many of those points, great speech. I think it almost feels like we've been applying sticking plasters since we dismissed Daniel Farke, really. Dean Smith, obviously there's a relationship between Stuart Webber and David Wagner, and it just kind of feels like even in the transfer window, it felt reactive and not proactive. It felt, like the immediate term and not even the medium term or long term. And it just felt all over the place. So, Connor, I really appreciate your time today, mate. I think finally, I'd really like to hear from you on David Wagner as a person, right? I think it's important that we apply a little bit of empathy, and we give him some credit, because he's, whatever you thought about his tactics on the pitch, I'm sure you've had lots of conversations with him over his tenure. What was, of course, I'm talking as if he's passed away. He's not passed away. What was he like as a man to speak with in terms of the press relationship? And because he's gone through some personal challenges this season as well, right? And I think that's important to factor in, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's never nice when you end up here, because ultimately, we're here because somebody's lost their job, and that's never a nice thing in any walk of life. Sadly, in football, it happens, and obviously people are financially, they're compensated for that, and all that makes it easier in any sense. But just a real gent. I think, irrespective of how difficult the questions were, he would not just answer them, which I think is one thing, and answer them with good grace and be quite articulate and quite composed. But a lot of the time he could understand why we had to ask them, or where they were coming from. And that is not a trait that a lot of head coaches and managers often understand. And if you ask them a question that's a little bit prickly, or it's not necessarily one that they like, it's seen as, you are sort of trying to pick at them and dig at them and criticize them. And there was never that sense with him. I don't think there was always a warmth and an understanding and actually a willingness to engage with a lot of those questions and try and explain and try and put forward his messages. And again, you can agree or disagree with that and what he says. And there were plenty of times where he said things that I disagreed with him. There were plenty of times where he said things that I agreed with him. But yeah, as a human being, and this is where I think you can separate it. You mentioned some of the personal challenges. Only very recently he had, his wife was ill, and he had to deal with that side of it. He's had obviously all the pressure of people talking about his job for months on end. That's not easy to hold yourself with dignity and with integrity as well. And I think, ultimately, park everything else. In many ways, that human element is the most important, because I think if you're a head coach of an organization, it's about how you lead. It's about how you conduct yourself and apply yourself. And he was always courteous. He was always respectful. And, I've been in positions where managers haven't been that in good spells, let alone in bad spells. So, yeah, I think, full credit to him. I think he can leave. We've spoken about the job that he did. I think he can leave with his head held high, to be honest. And irrespective of what you thought of David Wagner, the football manager, I think there's probably a lot of respect and warmth actually for David Wagner, the guy.
Some great thoughts, Connor. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much for all of the comments from you yellows in the chat on YouTube, X, Facebook, wherever you've been tuning in. It's going to be a busy summer, to say the least. Would highly encourage you to all stay tuned in to the Pinken, the podcast. Of course, Connor Southwell on his socials, and of course on Talk Norwich City. We will be continuing the conversation throughout the campaign. And why not? A shameless plug for the scrimmage as well. That's continuing over the summer. So just in case you have been under a rock today, David Wagner has been dismissed as the Norwich City head coach. And now the conversation starts. Who will be the new head coach? Connor, thank you so much for your time this evening, sir. And a massive thank you to Nick Mashter as well. And we shall see you for a TNC, ready for it, not podcast, counselling session next Monday on the Ball City.